So much, everyone, for joining us today. This is a very hard, deep subject, kind of dark, if you will, but it's something that I have worked very hard at in the last 12 years to bring light to this issue. As a teenager, having been trafficked and going to school during the day, nobody knew this was happening to me. And that has, through the years, driven me to be able to educate people like yourself on how to not only prevent this, but to identify it and step in and help these youth. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over some statistics. We're going to talk about where you can see this at, what happens, why they just don't come out and tell you. And then I will share with you a little bit about my story as well, so you can put some context to it. Let's see if I can, I guess I'll put on here. And I'm learning this as well. So a lot of us think of slavery in terms of women in cages, or we had a situation, several years ago with 3 young girls in Cleveland that were kidnapped and held in a basement, locked away. So these are images that most Americans think of when you think of the words human trafficking, or we even call it modern day slavery. I would never have identified with the word slave. It's still a hard word for me to grasp. And so I want you to go outside of that box of what you think of when you think of the word slavery. And again, we need to look at the opposite side of this, is who are the buyers and who are the people that are selling these young girls. A lot of this is going to surprise you. The guy in the middle here, we know that is a pimp. That book is actually $450 on Amazon, and I don't recommend that you go buy it, but it teaches anybody on how to be a pimp and how to make a lot of money and get away with, not getting arrested. The other 2 gentlemen, I use that word very loosely, are typical buyers. We have on the left-hand side Jeffrey Epstein, and he actually was considered a trafficker as well. He procured young girls and against their will many times, and forced his way upon them. And then actually they have gotten no restitution for that. And these were girls that were, 12 and 14 years of age, taken out of the country and within his own properties in the United States. The man on the right, some of you might recognize, he is the owner of the New England Patriots, Robert Kraft. He was found in a day spa, which we see these all around the country. And typically these are places that are open till 2 or 3 in the morning. And, I personally have a membership at a massage therapist place, and it's not open at 2 a.m. So he got away scot-free as well. And that is actually a form of human trafficking, when you're buying somebody for pleasure other than what it's advertised. And I can guarantee you that those women that worked there were not being paid. Many times they end up sleeping there, staying there, and then they're forced into this life. So this is what a buyer or a seller could look like. So let's look at some of the facts of human trafficking. The definition is when you recruit someone, you harbor them or transport them using force, fraud, or coercion. What this simply means is if you manipulate a person, you blackmail them, or you threaten them into forced labor or commercial sex. And so we all know what forced labor is. I'm from the Midwest, I live in Ohio. We've had several cases of forced labor trafficking, chicken farms, dairy farms, agricultural areas, even again, massage parlors, restaurants, things like that. But my specialty lies in the area of what we call domestic minor sex trafficking. And that is minors under 18 who live in the United States and for the most part are American and are being sold for commercial sex. Again, that just describes about being commercially sex trafficked. If you are under the age of 18 and involved in any form of commercial sex, by federal definition, you are a victim of human trafficking. That could be pornography, videos or pictures. It could be working in a strip club. And we have found girls as young as 14 who have been working in strip clubs. That was in Akron, Ohio. And if you're over the age of 18 and you have what we call a pimp or a trafficker, someone that's forcing her out there to do this, then you are actually a victim of human trafficker. We call her a prostitute, and many times she's arrested. And that's one of the things that we're trying to change is for law enforcement to see that she actually is a victim of human trafficking. Another myth is that physical movement is required. Somebody asked me one time, "Oh, what country were you taken to when you were trafficked?" And I said, "None. I was trafficked, right outside my own home and my community, in Birmingham, Michigan, outside of Detroit." Physical movement is not required. You can hold somebody in a house and have men brought to her all night long, and that's human trafficking. When you move somebody, that is smuggling, and that can be different. Smuggling can many times lead to human trafficking as well, though. And this is really not about sex. This is about money and greed and what people will do to go to all extents to try and get this. One of the most shocking statistics, I think, is that 80% of all victims of human trafficking in the United States are women. So this really does make this a women's rights issue. 50% are children, which is staggering. And 20% are men and boys. And we'll get into that one a little bit later, too. Men and boys are increasing, actually, especially in the homeless populations, of being trafficked and vulnerable. So I know many of you are from different states, and so we're going to talk about like why your state might have a lot of human trafficking cases. Do you have extensive highway systems around you? I know where I'm at, we have many highways, lots of traffic, and so really in Ohio, for instance, no matter where you are, you can leave the state within 2 hours. So as nice as that is, you can also come up missing very fast. Like I said, we have a lot of truck traffic, a lot of semi traffic. And many times these girls are being transported through the truck stops. International borders, some of you might not have this. For Ohio, for instance, you can go to Toledo, Detroit, and out through to Canada. You can also go through Ashtabula to Buffalo and out through Niagara as well. So it's not too difficult. Michigan as well has lots of international borders. So again, you can come up missing very fast. Universities and colleges, even though this is particularly for younger students, colleges and universities the students there are very at risk of becoming trafficked. I know I tend to concentrate on, kids under 18, but these kids are extremely, at risk because, again, of the drug and alcohol populations and the kind of atmosphere environments where they're going to school. They are not supervised as much, their mom's not calling to make sure they're in bed and on curfew. And they're there for a dream. And so there's, bad guys sometimes lurking to try and convince them that they're the most beautiful person and are going to be a movie star. So I know of no university that has human trafficking prevention in their freshman orientation. And I think every high school and college should include that. Do you live in an area that there's large immigrant populations? Immigrants are extremely at risk to being trafficked. Number one, they don't know our laws. Many times they don't know our language. A lot of times these traffickers will hold their documents so they don't have that. They're told lies about the police. They're afraid of them. and they owe a debt. And many times these traffickers will use that against them and even threatening their family back home. If you live in an area where there's military bases, unfortunately, the areas around those bases drive up the demand for sex for sale. We see a rise in strip clubs, pornographic stores, things like that, in areas where there's military bases. And then do you have a lot of strip clubs that are around you, or tourist areas and casinos? These again are areas that will drive up the number of human trafficking or just make you more at risk where you're at. So how often does this happen? A lot of people think this is just a problem in other countries, not in America. You know, maybe once in a while you'll see this. Well, unfortunately, it happens quite often. Let's start on the bottom one here, 3%. 3% are actually kidnapped. And isn't that the way that we generally see human trafficking? The movie Taken, you know, a lot of our NCI, you know, CSI TV shows show these young girls kidnapped maybe from Walmart or the movie theater, but it's actually only 3% that are kidnapped into this. But we do know that there are several 100,000 kids in the United States being trafficked right now. So 3% of several 100,000 is not really that small of a number. A third of all human trafficking victims are actually trafficked in the United States by a family member, somebody that they know. And this is, to me, the most staggering one. I work a lot with survivors, and our statistics are showing over 40% have been molested and sold as a young child, and then go on to being trafficked as well after that. And they truly have the hardest time of recovery. So when we talk about pimps and traffickers, you know, don't think of that guy with the big hat and dollar sign, you know, gold necklaces. It can actually be a family member. And then 62%, where my case falls into, were trafficked because they were tricked. They were manipulated by an older boy, by a friend that they go to college with. I know of a young lady that a couple in her subdivision saw the situations that she was having at home and actually tricked her into this. And so I'll give you an example too of a familial trafficking, what we call. I was in a tiny little town in Michigan and spoke to an entire high school. It was a Catholic high school, 9th through 12th graders. And after I shared my story, a 9th grader, 14 years old, walked up to me and she said, "Miss Flores, my mom used to sell me to the landlord to pay the rent." And it was a really tough moment because I didn't know what to say. And she said, "But he's in jail now." And she was very, very happy and walked away. But in the back of my mind, I wanted to know what happened to her mom. A lot of times, these kids are removed. They're in foster care. They don't have any support system, or they remain in that, and it just continues on. So this is the most important information right here, is what are the components of human trafficking? Which one of these is the most important to be able to end human trafficking in our country? I know our textbooks tell us that slavery ended years ago, but unfortunately it just took a different look to it now. So these are the components that we have here. We have the demand for sex. We have the exploiter or the trafficker. We have the groomer, the recruiter, the guy that goes in and swoops in. We have the victim and the customer. So I'm going to ask you, which one of these do you think that if we removed this, I could have stayed in bed today and my job would be over? It's interesting to see how many of you think which one's on here. So I'm going to start with the exploiter, the trafficker. This is a person, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a man. It can be a woman. We have seen a rise in women traffickers. Unfortunately, a lot of them were trafficked to begin with. and they've just moved up the ranks and now become the exploiter. We don't know a lot about this person. We don't know what makes him wake up one morning and say, I'm going to go make hundreds of thousands of dollars and sell another person. The average trafficker makes $300,000 a year tax-free from one girl working for him. And he generally has about 4 girls. So the exploiter, he knows that there's very low risk in this. I mean, how many times have you seen it on the news or in the newspaper that a trafficker, a pimp, just got arrested, he got put away for life? Very rarely is he going away to jail. And there's several reasons for that. So there's low risks, but there's high rewards for him, all right, because he can make a lot of money. So he knows that he could go to jail. So he's going to look for a recruiter, a groomer. And again, that could be another young lady, all right, a cuter boy, someone that's maybe not as smart. And he says, hey, if you go find me some girls, I will cut you in on this money. And they agree wholeheartedly. Okay, great. Or he holds something over their head to make them do this as well, blackmailing them. The recruiter then goes and looks for the victims. I run a program called SOAP, Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution, and we actually get the National Human Trafficking Hotline number out to hundreds and thousands of hotels all across the country for victims to see. There's no amount of SOAP that we have that will be able to rescue every one of those victims out there. There are literally hundreds of thousands of victims under 18 and over 18 that are being trafficked right now. If you think about it, we have had sexual slavery since the beginning of time. Unfortunately, it's something that I can't stop. The victims don't even need to go anywhere because the customer comes looking for them. You don't see very often anymore, girls out on the streets knocking on car windows, the streetwalkers as we've called it. That's a lot less these days. What's happening is the trafficker is listing them online on different websites, and the customer calls them and arranges a date. That's what it's called, is a date. Where they kind of gotten away from the term trick anymore. So the customers come looking for them. Again, low risk. How many times do we see that a John, which is what we call a person that's buying someone for sex, that he's been arrested? Occasionally you'll see these nationwide stings, and it will say, a doctor, a chiropractor, a dentist, a teacher was arrested for trying to buy a prostitute. And again, I just hate this terminology because she is a trafficked victim as well. Some cities are wonderful, and they will say the name and the age of the person that got arrested. If it was my dentist, I would want to know his name. It's public record. But nothing is going to deter him from doing this unless we get stronger laws, which is the demand. The demand for sex for sale these days is so high that this has become the second leading crime in the United States. And when we talk a lot about the leading types of death, heart attack, but the second leading crime in the US is the demand for sex for sale. Probably 90% of people don't know that out there. So a lot of these customers, they are addicted to sex, to pornography, and they're looking for prostitutes, and then they're looking for younger and younger girls. And very rarely are they being arrested. Generally, it's a misdemeanor. It's a $150 fine, generally, if you get caught trying to promote prostitution by buying somebody, and then they go scot-free. Some cities and some states are actually increasing those penalties, making them attend what we call John schools, or raising the fines for this as well. That is actually the only way that we can stop human trafficking, is by going after the demand and changing how we view this whole situation. So I think it's also important to talk about what kind of messages are kids getting. I'm sure that you've been in this field for a while and you've seen things change, things from nice, wholesome TV shows and magazines to games like this. I think this is the second highest rated game out there, Grand Theft Auto. And in it, I'm not sure if all of you know, a lot of teachers actually do not know that this game promotes the degradation of women. Not only can you steal a car and kill a cop, but you can pick up a prostitute, you can have sex with her, you can kill her, get your money back, and your lifeline increases. You can actually go into a strip club and get a lap dance, and it teaches you how to be a pimp. Yes, it's rated, mature audience, 17 and older. But a teacher told me once that she knows of a first grader in her class that plays this game. Obviously, he has older brothers and things, but many parents and teachers don't really know what is going on with some of these video games. And these kids are receiving that message that this is okay, that there's nothing wrong with this. So we also have, the history of our toys through the years. I'm in my 50s, and I remember my Barbie dolls very fondly. But today they've changed. They don't look like that anymore. The doll on the right is what we call a Bratz doll. And then if any of you have young girls, you'll know girls around 4 to 6 to 9 years of age love these dolls. And I guess you can just see from the image the difference right here. The Bratz doll has very short skirts, has what we call thigh-high stockings, what we call stripper shoes, and the makeup, and not quite so wholesome looking. And so this is where things have just kind of progressed, and kids are getting these messages. Even television shows. My daughters grew up watching the Gilmore Girls, a very wholesome TV show as well. And now we have shows like the Kardashians. And when I talk to kids in their high schools, I ask them, what kind of what kind of messages do you get from the Kardashians, from these reality TV shows? Is it about material items? Is it about sex? What is the message that you're getting? So this is a picture of myself when I was a young girl. I am Irish Catholic, and I had 3 younger, annoying brothers. I grew up in the Midwest. I had a mom and a dad. They were not divorced. They were together until my father passed away. And we went to church every Sunday. I was not what you would consider the typical girl that you would think that would be trafficked. I was a good girl. I was not promiscuous. I didn't run away ever. I did not do drugs. I was just a normal kid. This is actually a picture of myself after I escaped trafficking. And I was in college, and there's my 3 dorky brothers. So, so it's just to show you that this can really happen to anybody. So my life was a little different than most people's. I was upper middle class, and my dad worked for General Electric. And in his job, we were moved every 2 years because of his position. He would get promoted and transferred, and we lived all around Ohio, all around Indiana, Michigan. And when I was young, my mom made it into an adventure. It was, you got to meet new people and explore and see new things. And I thought it was pretty fun, It was the way it was anyway, so I didn't have any say about it. But I don't have any friends from kindergarten or first grade. When I speak in public, I ask the audience, do you have a friend still that you know of from kindergarten or first grade? And so many people say yes. And that just kind of blows my mind. I didn't have a support system. no matter how rich I was, which we were, not hurting for money at all, no matter how rich I was, I don't think that I had a very good support system. Um, I didn't have aunts and uncles or relatives that lived in my town. I didn't have teachers that knew me since I was a little girl that could see a change in me. I went to church, but again, every 2 years that church would change. And it made me always the new kid. And that was really difficult because after about a year, you figure out everyone's lingo, you fit in, you start to have sleepovers and go to roller skating parties, and then you're moving again and you have to start it all over again. And so it made me vulnerable. The moving, being the new kid, made me extremely vulnerable because of that lack of support system. And that could happen to kids that their parents are trying to avoid children's services, divorce, losing jobs, moving around a lot. So it doesn't matter your socioeconomic background on that. So it's really important to identify how this kid could be vulnerable, and because every kid is vulnerable. So we moved from southern Indiana all the way up to a place called Flushing, Michigan, very rural area. And I went, dirt bike riding, rode horses. We had a pond. We went ice skating and fishing, just a normal kid. And the middle of my ninth grade, we moved again. And my brother was talking to me recently. We were looking at the dates of when we moved. And so many times we ended up moving in the middle of a school year. And that's a really, really tough thing to do, as I'm sure that you're aware of, because fitting in is very difficult, studying wise, trying to catch up educationally. You're at a really big disadvantage. So we moved the middle of my ninth grade, and what made that even harder was that in ninth grade, where I lived before, that was high school. And so I was a freshman in high school. And then when we moved to the new location, I now became a back into the junior high because their ninth grade was in junior high. So that had a really big effect on me. And so I went to this new school and tried to fit in. It was outside of Detroit, Michigan, so it was very upscale. Everybody was even more rich than I was. It was fast paced. Everybody wore name brand clothes, and it was very different than anything I had ever experienced. And I met a boy, and he was really cute. And generally, most survivors will tell you this is how their story starts. This boy started to pay a lot of attention to me. He, I would say, targeted me. And I think that if I was ever able to talk to this group of guys that trafficked me, if I was ever able to ask them a question, I would ask them how they knew. What was it about me that they targeted? And he started to just pay a lot of attention to me. He was always around, giving me compliments, walking me to class. But I was able to get into this one group of friends I call the B clique. It wasn't the popular girls, but it was, the next tier down. And they didn't like him. And they told me, our two cliques don't mix. If you want to be friends with us, you need to date the guys that are in our clique. And I really, truly just wanted to fit in. I wanted to have friends. So I said, okay. And here I was 15. And so this boy starts to call my house. And my father is very, very strict. We're Irish Catholic. I'm the only girl. And in my family, back in those days, I was not allowed to date until I turned 16. It was like the golden age. I couldn't until I could drive a car, I could wear makeup. Everything happened when I was 16. And so my father would not let me speak to him on the phone. And this guy was so convincing. He was what I call suave. He wasn't like the kind of redneck guys that I went to school with that drove a pickup truck and went hunting every fall. He was dressed nicely, smelled good, and just always knew what to say to me. So 6 months go by, and now I'm officially back into high school in my sophomore year of high school. And it was February, and I stayed after school because I was on the track team. It was my one thing that I really enjoyed doing, no matter where I lived. That was like my release. And I was after school, and I remembered I needed something from my locker. So I ran back to my locker, and there he was, just propped right up against my locker. And my heart did this little jump, this little butterfly thing where it ends up in your stomach. And I was like, wow, like who's he waiting for me for? And I guess it was me. And he said, hey, Teresa, would you like a ride home from school today? I had no plans on going home going home yet. I was still in track practice. But here's this cute boy that I have a crush on and that I'm not allowed to like him. So I hopped at the chance. I thought, what could go wrong, right? We went out to his car in the parking lot of the high school. And to make it just even more enticing, he had a brand new 1980 black Trans Am. That was a really nice car with a bird on the top and the fins. And so I get into his car and I think, this is great. And I pulled out of the parking lot the wrong way. I lived to the left and he turned to the right. And I was like, wait, I live this way. And he said, oh, I know, but I just need to run home and grab something I forgot. Now, warning flags went off in my head because my parents had had a lot of conversations with their only daughter. And then I thought, Teresa, you know him. You go to school with this guy. It's not a stranger. You go to the same church as he does. It's fine. So I ignored those warning flags. And we pull up to his house, which was probably twice the size of mine. My picture, my house is here on the right hand side. And he said, would you like to come in? I just have to grab something. And that day I said everything that my parents had taught me. I said, no, I need to get home. My mom's waiting. But after all these months, after all these compliments, my life changed with 3 words. He said, I like you. That is all it took. I went in, I thought everything would be okay, and I was wrong. That day, he drugged me and he raped me. And that afternoon, when I went back home, I made another life altering mistake. I decided not to tell my parents. I was ashamed that this happened. I thought it was my fault. I thought my parents would see me as dirty and be disappointed. And I thought, I'm just going to keep this to myself and go on, and nobody will know. Unfortunately, it got worse because several days later, he came up to me at school with an envelope full of photos. Now, today, this is sexting. He said my 2 older cousins were there and we have a plan. And that plan is that you're going to earn these back or else. I had no idea what he meant. I thought he meant like wash their car, do their homework. But he said, we will be in contact with you. And if you don't come and do what we say, we're going to take these photos to where your dad works. They knew his boss's name. They knew the address of his office. They said, we're going to post them around school. We're going to show them to the priest at church. It was blackmail all the way. And I really was so naive that I had no idea what they meant by earn them back. What happened was they would call my private phone that I had in my room several nights a week, and they would demand that I there immediately for service. Now, I didn't wear short skirts and dress up like those Bratz dolls. I went in my pajamas and barefoot so I could sneak out, and I would run through my backyard, through the neighbor's yard, and meet that Trans Am, usually around midnight. And they took me to beautiful homes all around the Detroit area where they would sell me to man after man after man. Usually around 3 in the morning, they would take me back home and I would sneak back inside and I would go to bed for about 2 or 3 hours and get up for school the next day and do it all over again. Nobody had any idea something like that was going on to a kid like me. Nobody asked that one extra question. A few people said, "Hey, are you okay?" And I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine." Nobody just asked one extra question. The neighbor who lived behind me saw me many times run through his backyard at night, on a school night, in my pajamas and barefoot, and he never said anything to my parents. My grades dropped from A's and B's to D's and F's, but they thought, oh, she's just having a hard time adjusting to this new school district. And I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I was falling asleep in class all the time. I was exhausted. We know a lot of teenagers do that. I had headaches and stomach aches. I missed a lot of school, but everybody thought, oh, it's just, growing pains, and they dismissed it. But again, I wasn't talking, so I do have to take responsibility for that as well. But the reason that I wasn't talking was because they threatened to kill my family. My brothers walked to school as well, and a lot of times they would follow us home. Sometimes the car would stop and they'd say, "Get in, Teresa, now." I worked at a part-time job at Burger King, and sometimes they would come and just stand there and watch me. It was a horrible, horrible 2 years of my life without not having any idea how to get out of it. Even the men that purchased me those nights, they never asked how old I was. They never asked my name because they didn't care. And this is why I do what I do now, because I wish that one person would have just asked one additional question. Now, I will tell you that these guys belonged to, I would call it an upper class gang. And a lot of the teachers and the principals and the people at this school were very afraid of this group. They did not know how to handle this group. But unfortunately, I was one of the victims of that because they didn't confront these guys. I remember trying to go into my typing class, remember typing classes, at the end of the day, and just relieved that I had gotten through the whole day without any confrontation from these guys. And the bell was about to ring, and the teacher was standing right by the door. And she said, "Come on, Teresa, the bell's going to ring." And two of the traffickers that were in this group came up to me and they said, "I need to speak to you now." And I'm like, "I got class, I've got to go." My class, and the teacher's standing right there. And she said, "Come on." And the bell rang, and the men told her, they were 18, 19, told her she'll be there when we're finished with her. And she said, "Okay." And she went inside and closed the door on me. Now, I can't explain to you that feeling of just being left there and not having anybody help me in that situation and what I had to do after that moment. So 10 years ago, I created a company called SOAP, Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution. I created this because even though I was not a streetwalker, I was not a prostitute, I was kidnapped one night and drugged and raped and taken and left for dead at a motel in the inner city Detroit, where they had sold me to 20 men in a night. In the morning, I woke up and I was all alone, and I couldn't find any of my clothing. My pajamas were in the bathtub. And I found a little bit of resilience. I don't know if it was my faith, it was my family foundation, but somewhere deep inside of me, I found an ounce of resilience. And I decided that my story wasn't going to end this way. You see, my parents thought that I was at home in bed at this moment, and I wasn't. And I was truly missing at that moment. I put on my pajamas and I started walking around the parking lot of this motel. And I walked into this little diner, and I had kind of what I call my aha moment. It's the moment that saved my life, actually. I walked into this little diner, and somebody said something to me. Somebody finally asked me that one question. It wasn't a teacher, it wasn't a coach, it wasn't a parent, it wasn't a teacher, it wasn't a guidance counselor. It was a waitress working in this 24-hour diner in this nasty Detroit inner city motel. She looked at me and she saw a kid in trouble. And she said, "Can I help you?" How simple is that? Can I help you? Now, most of you that work with kids, you can probably imagine what I said. I said, "No, I'm fine." Typical response. But she did me another favor that saved my life. She didn't believe me. And she called the police that morning, and they came and picked me up and took me home. Now, that's not the end of my story. Things changed after that, and I was blessed. I had a miracle happen in my life about 4 months later, and we were transferred again 1,000 miles away across the country, and nobody knew where I went to or where I ended up. But it was just the simple question that she asked that we need to ask more often. Can I help you? And not give up on her, even when it's somebody you wouldn't expect that this would happen to. So this is why I do what I do. This is the picture that drives me to keep going when things get tough. It's not easy standing up in front of thousands of people all around the country and sharing my story, but it's for Grace. The girl in the upper left-hand corner, the first picture, is Grace. She's 15 years old here, either a freshman or a sophomore, and she looks precious. But unfortunately, all of these are pictures of Grace. All of them until the very last one on the lower right-hand corner, where she was 17 years old and died shortly after this photo was taken. These are actually mugshots of Grace, of every time she was arrested for prostitution. Now, she's a kid. Can you imagine if Grace was enrolled in your school? And you saw every once in a while she would pop up. She'd be missing. She'd miss a lot of school. Nobody comes knocking on these kids' doors anymore to see, hey, what's going on? Can you imagine if you'd seen her standing outside of a movie theater one night and you recognized her? What is she going through? Can you see the look on her face? A teenager. Now, we call this child prostitution. She got arrested for prostitution, yet she's a child. She really is a victim of human trafficking. And nobody wants to do this. People usually say, oh, they make a lot of money, or it's because of the drugs. But somebody's giving them the drugs. Somebody's forcing this upon themselves. She's being beaten. She probably is not appropriately dressed for the season. She probably has poor hygiene. She can't concentrate. She's falling asleep. Can you just imagine if this was your daughter or a student that you go to school with? What would you do? What would you do if you saw this transition here? How would you help her? The reality of human trafficking in the United States is that the average trafficked woman has to have sex with 10 to 15 men every single night of the week, 7 nights a week, 7 nights of the week, 365 days of the year. I hate it when people say, like, prostitution is a profession. In no way is this a profession that somebody would choose. She has a 40% higher chance of death than any of you. Most likely she will die of murder from the pimp or the John, because she doesn't know how to get out of it, or overdose. I really concentrate on children that are being trafficked because we know that if we don't rescue them as a child, 77% of them have a chance of becoming an adult prostitute then. Most likely she will be involved in the court systems, the social service system, the welfare system, the mental health system, and the physical health systems. She will experience PTSD for the rest of her life. A lot of them have Stockholm syndrome, depression, and multiple medical needs. And unfortunately, the reality is that she won't be rescued. So this is a bar of soap, and the labels that we have on it, and that we get and we disperse, and we get thousands of volunteers around the country to help us do this around big sporting events. Unfortunately, we're not having big sporting events at the moment, but we know that they are still being trafficked out there. So what can you do? Well, let's leave you with a little bit of hope here. If you have kids, check your kids' beds every night. Get up at 2 and 3 and see if they're there. If my parents had done that, I wouldn't be here on this call with you today. Think about what kind of messages are we giving kids? You know, is it okay to listen to these inappropriate songs? You know, talking to your kids about, let's change the channel and maybe why this is not appropriate. Get your kids' friends, parents' phone numbers. You know, every kid has a cell phone now, and we think that we can reach our kid no matter what because they have a cell phone. But if your kid came up missing, you know, you might have your kid's friend's phone number. But what about their parents? We don't have landlines too much anymore. Remember, these traffickers are getting very, very good at this, and we need to get better. We've kind of let our guard down. Again, don't let your guard down. Just because you live in a very nice area with a great school system doesn't mean that a trafficker can't get those kids. I know of a female ex-trafficker, and she told me she would walk right into a school, right past the administration desk, into the cafeteria, sit down, and just listen. Sit down, and it was usually a group of girls talking about, oh, this, you know, pair of shoes they want, or that new purse they want. And one time she walked out with 6 girls and went straight to her truck and left with them. It was that easy. Don't assume these kids will confide in you, no matter if it's your daughter or your son. It doesn't matter, because these guys are so good at manipulating and brainwashing these kids. Really, you know, again, and we hear this all the time, getting your kids' computer passwords, their phone passwords, checking everything. And if they complain, you know, just tell them, hey, we're here to protect you. It's not because we don't trust you. It's because we don't protect the people around us. There's some great webinars you can get onto of what really bad apps are out there that are on the kids' phones as well. And talk to them about sexting. Social media and sexting is probably one of the #1 ways that these guys are getting and infiltrating these kids today. Again, like I said, every high school needs some orientation into the school on how to protect themselves, how to, what are the red flags of this? And just be a nosy neighbor, all right? If I'd had a nosy neighbor, you know, my life would be different. The red flags all differ. You know, kids that change in their demeanor, they become withdrawn and jumpy. Their clothing changes, their friends changes. And remember that sometimes it can be a parent that's doing this as well. And we need to treat this like drunk driving, where we made it socially unacceptable to drink and drive. We need to make it socially unacceptable to buy another person for sex in our country. So one of the last things that I'll leave you with is a really good feeling here. One of the things that the SOAP project does is we also help survivors heal. We have had 125 survivors attend our retreats. This one was actually taken in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, where they donated a retreat to 25 survivors of human trafficking. The woman there on the lower right-hand corner is my dear, dear friend. She is in her 60s, and she was trafficked for many, many years. She ended up killing her pimp. She shot him before he shot her, and she was convicted for life in prison. It's just so ironic, I think. But she did 17 years in prison. She was not able to raise her children. Now, actually, one of her children is incarcerated as well. But after 17 years, she got out. And now she is a PhD social worker and has her own business, her own company. And she went on this retreat with us. And it's just such a beautiful, beautiful picture of what happens when you pour just a little bit of love into somebody. So that is all that I have there. You can also check out my books on my website and just Google my name as well. And I think we can take some questions.
Excellent. Well, Teresa, thank you so much for sharing your story and the strategies for how we can help these students. We have had a couple of questions come in, so I will read those aloud and we can address them here in the rest of our time together.
Okay.
First one says, thank you for sharing your story. Our family experienced great trauma as our daughter was trafficked. What kinds of supports can an educator give to families experiencing these kinds of trauma?
So you've got really need to look up some resources. Project, POLRIS. If you go onto their websites, they have a map that they can tell you what resources are in your state and in your area, everything from counseling to group homes to just somebody to talk to. They take calls. It's a 1-800 number. It's 888-3737-888. You can call them 24/7 and they can actually help you with resources as well. Unfortunately, when a victim goes through this, it really is a lifetime of healing. It's not something that, you get them a little counseling and they're good to go. And they can also contact us at the SOAP project as well.
Excellent. Comment here, my daughter has a friend who shares how she runs away from home to be trafficked by older men. She tries to convince peers that she has a glamorous lifestyle because she's given high-end clothes and shoes. I thank God my daughter feels comfortable talking with me.
First of all, I wonder how old that she is that she's doing this. If it's a minor, that's illegal, and I would report that right away and get her into children's custody or the police and then really go on that if she's a minor for sure. It's hard because she's brainwashed, right? And so we have to really try to deprogram her and to knowing that, it's not for the nice things. There are very few women out there. It's like 3% that do this because they choose to do it. They're called sex workers, and they think of this as a job, but it's very, very few. The rates of violence against them is huge. Sexually transmitted diseases. It is not a great lifestyle, and unfortunately, she's opening herself up to a lot of bad things to happen. So just being able to give her a phone number to say, hey, you might mention that there's a phone number in case anything were to happen to, to rethink this. And reading books, survivors like myself, to show the other side of that. It is kind of hard to convince people once they're in that, though.
Yes, agreed. Another question is, what is the best way to approach someone who you believe is being threatened?
So you have to be very careful because if the trafficker or the pimp is nearby, and a lot of times they are watching, they are nearby, it can be very dangerous, not just for yourself, but for her as well. Calling 911, if it looks like there's a situation going on, do not hesitate to call 911. Many law enforcement have been trained across the country on this as well. You can call and just say, hey, I see something happening. Can you do a well-being checkup on her? If you use those terms, they're generally much more open to going and checking it out, saying a well-being checkup. Don't call and say, hey, I think this girl's being trafficked. You got to give them, what is she wearing? What's going on? You have to be very good about that. But I probably wouldn't intercede. You can, if it's in your school or something, you can hand them up your business card and say, here's my card. Call me if you need anything. And I know that's hard for a lot of people because they don't want to, well, what do I do if she calls? So you have to come up with a plan, and it is difficult. Every school needs to have a protocol in place. What's in the fall are you going to do if a student comes to you and says, hey, my parents are selling me, or I'm in this situation and I don't know how to get out? What are you going to do? So forming a committee, obviously including the school nurse, the school counselors, and being able to come up with what is our protocol going to be. Every school needs to have that.
Okay. Another comment here, very powerful webinar. As an educator, we talk about all the other issues kids experience from home that translates to school. However, no one talks about sex trafficking. I will make sure that my school is aware of this problem during our upcoming school year. We, as educators and parents, need more trainings like this. Thank you for sharing your story, as it will help others, including myself.
Well, thank you for that. I do have two books that you can look up. One is called Slavery in the Land of the Free, the name of the webinar, so it should be easy to remember. It's on Amazon. You can get those from our website as well. They are written for middle and high school students. There was no book out there written for a student on what is human trafficking, what is labor trafficking, what things do I have in my closet that slaves made, and at the end of each chapter is a freedom fighter challenge of what you can go and do this, go and talk to somebody, go and look in your closet, all countries where these made from. And there's lots of nice diagrams and stuff. So getting a copy of that for your school library, or having it if you're in an English class or a speech class. And then my personal story, The Slave Across the Street, we have a special on it, not the new one, but the one that's 10 years old, which is still a great book. But it's really just my personal story and how these guys got me and how I didn't know how to get out. But it ends with some tips for kids too. So getting these kinds of books in the hands of these kids and in the school library, I think would be a really big asset to your school as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Teresa, again, for sharing your story and your time with us today. We learned so much. This webinar was recorded, and we will be sharing it with all registrants and participants who made it to the webinar. You are now free to close the GoToWebinar control panel, and that will log you out of the session for today. Take care, everybody, and we will hopefully be seeing you again at our next ELN Live event. Thank you.
Thank you.